This short film was inspired by the BBC initiative, The Art That Made Us, a documentary series exploring our creative history. The series examines how pivotal works of art, literature, design and music have helped shape our creative story. Send and Ripley History Society were keen to participate, and so we decided to showcase Clarence Sex and family, the Blacksmiths of Send, who made wrought iron into an art form. Before telling the story of Sex and Company, the remarkable local blacksmiths in Send, it is perhaps important to understand what wrought iron is. The word wrought comes from the past tense of work, so it is worked iron as opposed to cast iron. Wrought iron was commonplace in Roman times, but its heyday was perhaps from the 17th century on. The blacksmith had to work the iron when it was at just the right stage of heat and flexibility. It was heated, folded and hammered, and was ideal for ornamental work, but not hard enough for swords. Here is a sample of these techniques, courtesy of Aqua Iron Wrought Iron, Varna, Bulgaria. Today, wrought iron has largely been superseded by steel. Despite featuring in the Doomsday Survey, Send, as the village it is today, did not exist in the 18th century. As can be seen from the map of 1768, there were small communities around the Church of St Mary the Virgin and in Send Marsh. Otherwise, it was a rural area of outlying farms. Flints have been found in the area, indicating that it was inhabited from prehistoric times. The rising ground above the River Wey would have provided suitable campsites and access to fish and game. It is not known whether occupation of the site was continuous, but what is known is there has been a place of worship in Send for hundreds of years. Send Court by the church is one of the oldest farms in the area. However, the position of the site meant the size of the community was limited by the river, prone to flooding and with the lack of a crossing, and the route from Guildford to Woking, now Old Woking. We know that for 3 years in the 1760s there was an army camp in each summer on nearby Send Heath, which is shown on the map as an uncultivated marshy area. Around this you could see field boundaries, presumably hedges. So Send Heath is the site of what is now the major part of Send Village. Although Send Heath had its drawbacks for development, it was close to the river crossing at Cartbridge and was not under cultivation. The army camp may have improved the tracks or roads in the area, and Old Woking was close by and was a more substantial community. There were also plentiful supplies of sand and gravel for building, and this was beginning to be extracted commercially. What we do know is the land around Cartbridge began to be built on in the 19th century. With many farms in the area, the services of a blacksmith were in demand prior to the arrival of Clarence Sex. The May family had run a smithy from about 1840. However, when Clarence bought the business in 1899, on what is now Send Barnes Lane, he was to change an average village blacksmith into a world-class workshop and thereby enhance the importance of the fledgling village of Send. He was a craftsman of remarkable skill. Clarence Sex was born in Eashing in Surrey in 1871, son of a Cranley man, Henry Sex, who was the village blacksmith in Compton for about 40 years. Encouraged by the eminent artist G.F. Watts and his wife, Clarence, who had followed his father into the business, started to produce ornamental ironwork. This included the ironwork on the Watts Memorial Chapel in Compton. The metalwork was designed by the architect George Redmayne and forged by Clarence for a fee of £21 and 5 shillings. Watts was apparently dismayed when Clarence left Compton and wrote to Mrs. Poulton, who owned the site of the forge, "I understand Clarence Sex is leaving Compton to become your tenant at the forge in Send. I regret Compton is losing a good workman and craftsman and an excellent member of the community. I can most thoroughly recommend him in all respects." Clarence was joined in the business in Send by his brothers Wilfred and later Gus, and in due course by sons Arthur and Ronald. Initially there was general blacksmiths work plus some ornamental commissions. During the First World War, when horses were still very important, they produced many thousands of horseshoes. Further north, towards Old Woking, is an area known as the Broadmeads. This area had an unusual, if not quite unique, type of land usage dating back to medieval times. The land was divided into strips, but this was not common land, as these strips were owned by individual landowners who could cultivate crops during specified summer months, but were entitled to graze a defined number of animals on the whole area once they had been branded. In the case of horses, their shoes had to be removed to prevent them kicking out and harming other animals. As a consequence, many of the blacksmiths' horseshoes have been found and are in the Society's collection. Some of the firm's early work includes a chancel screen for the English church in Montreux, Switzerland, which dates from 1914. In 2012, members Sheila and Les Brown visited the church in Montreux and were delighted to find the beautiful gates still there, now in the Lady Chapel. According to the Woking News and Mail of 1915, the gates were designed by C.F.M. Cleverley of Dunsborough Park, Ripley. In 1979, Ron Sex recalled that during the Great War, life was being carried on by the very young and the elderly. He did not mention the women, as all able-bodied men had been called up. He, a boy blacksmith, and his father Clarence were running the forge, and he said that 18,000 horseshoes were struck for the War Department in addition to their normal workload. In the 1920s, the ornamental side of the business began to take off. In 1929, they exhibited at a trade show at the Lion Works in Woking, and as a result they featured in the Daily Mirror and the Sunday Pictorial. From then on, the ornamental side of the business grew rapidly, with orders from round the world. They exhibited annually at the Chelsea Flower Show. As can be seen from this map, dated 1934, Send had grown, with housing all along the road on the same side as the smithy. Development on the other side was generally post-war. Many of the gates and house signs of these new houses were made by the forge. The gates and war memorial on the wreck are their work and still there today. The forge made the sign for the pharmacy, which was close to Mays Corner. The village was gradually becoming stretched out, and this crossroads had increased in importance, partly due to the school being built on Send Hill around 1870. The building is no longer a school, but retains the weather vane made at the smithy. Later, the village cemetery was sited on Send Hill, and once again Sex and Company were called upon to create the gates. The village of Send was also growing, as it was now a key route from Guildford, Ripley and the Portsmouth Road to the railway in Woking. The Second World War again interrupted business, and horseshoes were once more in demand, including for two famous shire horses, Captain and Senator, who were owned by A. W. Secret. Secrets was the main market garden in Send, and during the war employed a number of land girls to keep up food production. Tractors existed, but fuel was a precious commodity, so horses once again were in use. David Porter, a former member of the society, remembered seeing a shire horse at the forge, but due to the restricted width of the building, only half the horse could be contained within it, so its rear end was exposed for all to see, plus at the time 2 or 3 men busy shoeing the hind feet. Those men might possibly have been prisoners of war, who apparently cycled over from the camp in Merrow to help out, while trainee Bill Stocker learnt to do more intricate work. Some of his favourite commissions included new gates at Guildford City Football Club and replacing rusted scrolls round the Guildford town clock. But Sex and Company were also carrying out commissions for the military. In an attempt to lessen the effects of bombing, components for planes, submarines, etc. were often outsourced to small rural producers, and Sex and Company was no exception. Their work was on motor torpedo boats at Saint-Nazaire and Dieppe. They even helped with parts for Bailey bridges. After the war, it was back to business as usual, and by this time Clarence had retired and died in 1948, but ornamental work once again flourished. In the first post-war Chelsea Flower Show in 1947, they were overwhelmed by inquiries and orders. Apart from ornamental gates, they offered a range of weather vanes and boot scrapers, some with animal profiles, and retailing at 15 shillings. The cockerel weather vane on the roof of the Lady Chapel at Guildford Cathedral was one of their commissions, and, according to a society member, Reg Giles, stood 8 foot high. More examples are the entrance gates at George Abbott's Hospital in Guildford, the Lady Chapel screen in Guildford Cathedral, railings at Ascot Racecourse, and a set of gates for King's College, Cambridge. The firm continued to prosper, and Michael Sex says there were 6 anvils in the mid-1940s. In 1949, they marked their golden anniversary by producing a celebratory booklet. When the firm celebrated 50 years, they fired off the anvils, which involves setting a charge of gunpowder. However, by the mid-1960s, both Arthur and Ron Sex had decided to retire. Arthur's son had set up his own business elsewhere, and Ron's sons had made other careers, so the business finally closed. It went through several iterations as a petrol station, but is now housing, called Walnut Tree Place, after the tree that stood on the site, and not Sex Drive, the name suggested by our late chairman Les Bowerman. However, in the 60-plus years of its existence, C.H. Sex and Company were one factor in uniting this ancient but strangely strung-out community. However, before closing, we have a small piece of time travelling. In 1977, Marjorie Sex, then aged 73, gave a talk to our society on life in Send when she was a child, so before the Great War. Here is a short extract from that audio recording.
Then of course we've missed out the most important place in the village, haven't we? Sexist Blacksmiths. Yes. It really was marvellous. There's something about blacksmiths, you know. I married the Send one and my sister married the Ripley one. There must be something about them. But it really was a blacksmiths where they shod horses. And it had a stable door, you know, that opened at the top and then at the bottom, to keep the horses in and the kids out. And on a frosty, bitterly cold afternoon. It really was wonderful to see the children coming out from school and rushing down and leaning over the door, and the anvils singing away and the sparks flying. My husband's looking at us, and I thought it was wonderful. Yes, it is a bit romantic, but it was very nice indeed. It really was quite a bit. It's not a thing you often see now, is it?
Although the smithy is no longer there, it is commemorated in the village by a statue that was unveiled in 2011. It has been the subject of some benign yarn bombing in the intervening years. Here it is, very appropriately, in the colours of Send United. We may have lost the wrought iron artists, but their legacy survives in the gates and memorials both in Send and the wider world.